The standard DualSense is already one of the best controllers to have ever come out of any gaming console or any gaming generation, just ever. So when Sony finally announced that they were making a DualSense Edge or a Pro controller for the PlayStation 5, we really got excited and we had all these ideas and all these hopes for the controller, and what we got fulfilled most of them, and then some of them it didn't. Now the DualSense has been out, or DualSense Edge has been out for quite a while, and I only recently got one with the 30th anniversary DualSense Edge, because these are more targeted to pro players, those players that are doing esports and things like that, while I am predominantly a single player gamer. So how is my experience as a single player gamer with the DualSense Edge? Well, that's what this video is going to be covering, so let's hop straight into it. First of all, it has to be said, the DualSense Edge is a fantastic controller because of the base that it is built upon. It is basically a DualSense with all these additives put on, and this makes it really great. Some of the modular features of the DualSense Edge really take it to the next level of gaming, and what I find to be some of the most important aspects of that are the thumbsticks. Now, having these interchangeable thumbsticks are really some of the things that have truly been my favorite to experience or play my games with, because even though the DualSense normal standard controller has the same thumb caps as the old DualShock 4, I actually preferred the generations before that, so the PS1, the PS2, and the PS3. I loved the dome thumbsticks. They were so much more comfortable. I felt a little bit more accurate as well, so having them as an option on the DualSense Edge really has given me the first bit of, how do I put it? It's one of the things that has really made me fall in love with the DualSense Edge. It is probably my favorite thing about the DualSense Edge, and that is saying something because there are so many other features that the DualSense Edge has that still need to be covered. But before we hop into all of the things that I really love and the things that I'm not so fond of, let's talk about the type of games that I've been playing with the DualSense Edge. Now, like I said, I am a single player gamer for the most part, and as always, we have a list. But before I hop into all those single player games, there's one game that I have been playing recently quite a lot of that actually is more or less the game that I think the DualSense Edge is targeted towards, and that is Helldivers 2. Now, Helldivers 2 is not a single player game. This is an online co-op game that I think really benefits from the extra back buttons, and getting into those back buttons in just a second, you'll see that I have some odd configurations. I know that some people or most people will prefer just having the flappy paddles and not anything else, whereas I like to have a mixture of the two. But I just wanted to mention this is probably the game that I've played the most with the DualSense Edge coming into this review, but I have been playing quite a few single player games, and my experiences are vastly different one game to the next, because one game I will thoroughly enjoy it, and one game I will switch back to a normal standard DualSense controller. Where's mine? So while I love the DualSense Edge, and there are definite benefits to having it, I thought that it would almost immediately take the place of my standard DualSense controller, and then I would only be playing with that or with the DualSense Edge. And I couldn't have been more wrong. I actually still play a large majority of my games with a standard DualSense controller, which is quite weird considering that I have such an expensive and such an awesome controller here with me. But let's hop into some of the games that I have been playing. You'll see now on the screen that I've created profiles for quite a few different games. They include Alan Wake 2, Dragon's Dogma 2, Gran Turismo 7, obviously Helldivers 2 we've already spoken about, Returnal, FIFA. This one didn't last very long. This lasted like 2 minutes, and I just really wanted to see what it was like. Did not work. It was not my type of thing. So immediately went back to the normal controller. And then Lego Horizon Adventures is a similar story. I went back to the normal controller almost immediately after creating a profile for the DualSense Edge. I just wasn't clicking. It didn't feel like the type of game where the DualSense Edge was necessary, or the type of game where I would like to play it with. But there are a few games that I had a lot more experience with than those two in single player experiences with the DualSense Edge, and one of them is Alan Wake 2. Now, I've played a very good chunk of Alan Wake 2 with the DualSense Edge controller, and actually the thing that I use the most, even though obviously the paddles are fantastic, and while there are trigger stops, I don't use the trigger stops for Alan Wake 2 because Alan Wake 2 actually makes really good use of the DualSense controller, which can't be said about too many third-party games, which is really surprising. Third-party games don't often use the DualSense to the same capabilities that Alan Wake 2 has, so massive shout out to Remedy for actually putting in the effort and making Alan Wake 2 run phenomenally well on the DualSense controller. So having the trigger stops on isn't an option for Alan Wake 2. But the thing that actually surprised me the most and the thing that I enjoyed the most was, again, the thumbsticks are fantastic, but having two separate back button attachments allowed me to have a more selective and a more distinguished separation between the two back buttons. So for example, the flappy one on the right hand side is programmed for R1, which is the flashlight button on Alan Wake 2. And this is really important because you kind of need to use your flashlight to attack enemies, if you want to put it that way. Whereas on the left hand side, I have the dome, and this requires a much more emphasized input. So you actually have to press it quite a lot harder. Not like exert yourself hard, but it definitely requires more of an input than the little paddle. So you do need to press it a little. And this I wanted it to be reload because I didn't want my reload to happen too quickly, but I also wanted the flashlight to happen a lot more naturally. So Alan Wake 2 is one of the games that I have definitely used the more odd configuration of the DualSense Edge controller, and it has definitely yielded positive results. But actually on that, I still think my favorite thing to do with the DualSense Edge controller is just having the different thumbsticks. The dome thumbsticks help you just be a little bit more accurate in everything that you're doing. Now, I tried Gran Turismo 7 with both paddles. I thought that this was going to be awesome for shifting up and down. It just didn't work for me. I think I am so in tune with Gran Turismo 7 with playing with a normal DualSense controller that trying to add in a different type of input just really threw me off. I was not racing properly. I was too in my zone, or too much thinking about the gearing, and I wasn't thinking enough about the turns and the braking. So I just went back to using my normal DualSense controller, and I've been happy doing that since. So while I did think this was going to be a game where I thought the DualSense Edge was going to be leaps and bounds better than what I was doing with the normal controller, it just didn't turn out that way. I had to play with the normal DualSense controller. Now, another game that I definitely tried to put a little bit more time into, but I quickly realized it wasn't working, was Dragon's Dogma 2. I have done a review for Dragon's Dogma 2 on the channel if you want to go check that out. I really enjoyed the game. I gave it an 8 out of 10. It has been updated since to have pro enhanced features, but also it has a much better frame rate on even standard PlayStation 5s. So don't sleep on this game anymore. I think it is really fantastic. It is a great open world, but it didn't work very well with the DualSense Edge for me. The way I had it set up just didn't work. I tried to set it up to some of the face buttons, but you need all 4 face buttons to work almost together and cohesively to make this game work. If you know the combat in Dragon's Dogma 2, you'll understand why this might have been a little bit more difficult for me. So I kind of just swapped back to my regular DualSense for this game as well. But with all of those games said, there is one game that has really shown what this controller is capable of when it comes to single player experiences. We know it's targeted for your FPS type games, and with the trigger stops and all those type of things, it is fantastic for those type of games. But this, as a single player game, this is the game. Returnal with the DualSense Edge has been so much of a transcendent experience, if you want to put some big English word onto it. It is really a fantastic experience to play Returnal with the DualSense Edge, and my setup for this is different to how I usually set it up. So I don't actually use the dome back buttons, which I kind of used for the majority of my games. I now went immediately to both of them having the paddles, and I put the trigger stop for the right trigger and the right trigger only at max, or at the bottom level, so it is a much more short click than the left side, because the left side you still need to be able to Returnal has a fantastic way of using the triggers. So you need to be able to aim, and then there is a secondary function to all your weapons, and you need your left trigger to still be able to activate those secondary functions. But your right trigger you can do very fast shooting with. Obviously then you kind of lose your haptics in the triggers, but that was a sacrifice I was willing to make because the haptics of the controller are still there. You're not deactivating all the vibration functions and all of that type of things, but Returnal really makes incredible use of the DualSense Edge controller and the DualSense normal controller. But this gave me this, it felt like an edge, and it is a culmination of two major factors. One is the high dome thumbstick. The high dome thumbstick makes you quite a bit more accurate, and I didn't expect myself to notice it that much, but I definitely became a lot more accurate with the high dome thumbstick. And then being able to dash and do a melee attack very quickly with the back buttons really does take you to that next level, because with Returnal you can't stay still. If you stay still, you are immediately going to be an easy target and you're going to be wiped out. So having the ability to quickly move with dashes and melee attacks with these two triggers or paddles really is the best experience I've had as a single player gamer with Returnal. So I just want to run through some of my favorite things now that I've run through the games. My favorite things are definitely the dome thumbsticks. I have definitely mentioned that. That is number one on my list. They just make it feel a lot more natural to play, and I didn't realize it felt unnatural to play on normal controllers or DualShock 4s and DualSense controllers. I didn't realize that until I went back to dome controllers. I just love this so much. It feels like I am back as a child and just enjoying my games. Another thing that I really like is the case. I know that's a weird thing to like, but I really enjoy having a place to put my controller, knowing where it is. Now obviously I have the DualShock the DualSense charging station, and this works perfectly in there, but once my controller is fully charged I put it back in the case just to protect it a little bit more. These are expensive controllers. They are about 3-4 times more expensive than normal controllers, so having a place to put it that it is protected and having all your stuff in there is really fantastic. One thing I don't see mentioned enough is that this middle, I'll probably show you an overlay anyway, this middle thing here is actually for your additional thumbsticks. So if you didn't know, your DualSense Edge can have replaceable thumbsticks. Now they don't have gray ones for the 30th anniversary edition, but if I do ever have to replace it, I don't think the gray or the black is going to matter too much. So yeah, the case is definitely something that I find is really spectacular. Just having a place to put all your accessories, knowing that they're not going to be lost, and having a place to put your controller. And in addition, this incredibly long charging cable is also amazing. Now, you've seen that I don't use the same setup for two different games. So the modularity of the DualSense Edge and how quick it is to interchange those back paddles or activate or deactivate the trigger stops really plays a big part in how I play games, because I don't play games. It's very rare that I play one game and sit for 3-4 hours and play that game. Quite often I will change between games for 3-4 hours. So for 1 hour I might play Returnal, for another hour I might play Alan Wake, and then for the last hour I might play Helldivers. And for all three of those I have different ways of setting up the controller. So being able to do that very quickly on the fly, and it takes less than a second to change any of these things, really plays into how I use the DualSense Edge controller and how much I enjoy using the DualSense Edge controller. Okay, there obviously has to be one big bad. And the big bad here is the battery life. I tried to record how often or how much I was using the DualSense Edge controller without charging it and how the battery life was affected. And you'll see that in an hour I dropped about 33 or 30%. So it is fair to say that you're probably going to get about 3 hours to 4 hours worth of battery life off of this. And if you're playing something like Returnal, where it's making massive use of the DualSense's vibration functions, the triggers, all those things, you could maybe be sitting at the lower end, so probably definitely about 3 hours. But if you turn some of those things off, you could probably push about 4 or 5 hours. So the battery life is a bit of a sad situation, and I understand that it's not aimed or targeted towards single player gamers like I am. So it's not technically meant to be the situation where you're sitting on the couch and you're playing with it. You're probably supposed to have it plugged in the entire time. But obviously, as a single player gamer, you want to sit on your couch and you want to do things like that. So that's one of the biggest negatives and one of the biggest drawbacks I have about the DualSense Edge. But if you're happy to have it plugged in maybe, or maybe you only game for 2 hours at a time, then I think the DualSense Edge is still going to be fine for you as a single player gamer. But what about the single player gamer? Is the DualSense Edge targeted or good enough of an idea to purchase for a single player gamer? And this is a tough sell, because for a game like Returnal, yes, 100%. I think it is definitely worth it for Returnal. But if you're only doing it for one game, does that make it then worth it? Because I mean, Returnal, you're probably getting about 80 to 100 hours out of. Yes, it is a roguelike, so you're probably going to be hopping into it a lot more. But is it then worth it for one game? If you're playing multiple types of games, maybe you're not only just a single player gamer, you do hop online occasionally, then it definitely becomes more of an attractive option, and I definitely then would recommend it. But if you're purely single player and you're only looking at it for 1 or 2 games, you really have to think really carefully about then purchasing this controller. I think games like God of War and maybe The Last of Us also could benefit from the DualSense Edge. I haven't hopped into those games yet. Maybe I'll do a longer term review and hop into those type of games after a more extended period of time. But I wanted to get this video out because I actually hadn't played with the DualSense Edge before this, and I wanted to share my experiences as a single player gamer for you guys to maybe hop on and tell me if you guys think then that it is worth it as a single player gamer. There are certain games that definitely will make it more attractive for single player use, but it is definitely still a game that would probably prefer to be in multiplayer settings, and Helldivers 2 is definitely one where I think it is shining the brightest. And then as a single player, Returnal is phenomenal with the DualSense Edge. Other games that are more narrative focused like Alan Wake 2 can have a few benefits, but aren't really the target for this controller. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video and that you'll drop me a like and a follow and a subscribe maybe. And I'll check you next week for a really, really exciting video that I've been teasing for a few weeks. Cheers.